As I come to the end of my time here in Wadi Rum, I'd like to share 10 top tips so that if you're planning your own trip to Wadi Rum, these might help you make some better decisions. Tip 1 would be to plan ahead so that you can save time. We booked this online, and I will leave in the comment section just down below a link to the website for the Quiet Nights Desert Camp. We booked it all online, so we knew that we were staying for the 2 nights here. We knew on the first day that we were doing a tour around lots of different parts of the Red Desert, and then on the second day that we would be doing the mountain hike that was right down on the Saudi Arabian border. It meant that when we arrived at 10 o'clock, we were straight into the 4x4 and we were off, and we spent the entire day either visiting lots of different places or having our lunch. And then as soon as the sun had set and we'd lost the daylight, we were straight back at the camp, had the evening experience of the dinner and the music around the fire. Next day, again, straight up, straight away, and it just meant that there was no time wasted. Some people do tend to come to a camp, they've got the accommodation booked, but they don't have anything else sorted, and so there's time just taken up with getting to the camp, getting checked in, getting the luggage dropped off in the tents, and then there's that umming and ahhing of, well, what do we want to do? Obviously, it depends on the pace that you want to go at, but for us, we like to get as much out of our trips as possible, and so we were really pleased that we booked ahead. Tip 2. I'd strongly recommend prioritising a tour over your accommodation, and that's what we chose to do. For me personally, I don't tend to spend that much time in the actual accommodation when we're in areas like this, and for me it's about being out and about and exploring during the day. Therefore, I wasn't too fussed about what the accommodation was like. For me, I was a lot more interested in what was the tour going to be like, how much were we going to get out of it, and what was the value for money. Tip number 3. Definitely wear comfy hiking shoes, and if you don't have hiking shoes, as an absolute minimum, trainers. Most of the different places that our guide took us to involved a fair amount of scrambling, whether it was up rock faces, whether it was up boulder rocks, going up to things like the Lawrence Spring, whether it was up sand dunes. I'd say that out of all of the stops that we went to, probably about 25% we maybe could have gotten away with things like sandals or flip-flops, but a good 75% of the places that we visited, if I didn't have hiking shoes on, I would have been really regretting my footwear choice. Tip number 4, wear comfortable clothing. On the first day, because we knew we weren't going to be doing anything overly strenuous, I just wore a very light pair of chinos and this floaty, light, breathable top, and that served me absolutely fine. And then on the second day, when we knew that we were going to be doing a hike, I then switched over to more exercise type clothes, so a pair of leggings with a t-shirt that is very moisture wicking from a, I guess, sweating point of view, and I was really pleased with the choice of clothing that I went for. Tip number 6. On the topic of comfy clothing, if you are a female, I would highly recommend wearing a sports bra. The roads are pretty much non-existent. You're just driving on the sand, and they do get very, very bumpy, and we were getting thrown around all over the place in that 4x4. It obviously added to the fun of it, but I can imagine that if you're not wearing the right kind of bra, it could become incredibly painful. Tip number 6. Spend at least 2 days here. Some people will make the mistake of only coming up as a day trip if they're staying at a resort hotel down in Aqaba. A lot of people will stay for just 1 night. When we checked in at the police station, the police officer even went so far as to preempt and said, "You just for 1 night?" And we said, no, for 2 nights. And he seemed a little bit surprised. By staying for 2 nights, it meant that we got to spend a bit more time eating our lunch more leisurely, and that was particularly helpful in the height of the heat of the day. It also allowed for us to explore both the Red Desert, which is a bit further north within Wadi Rum, as well as the White Desert, much further south. Tip number 7, engage with your guide. We had some amazing conversations, whether it was when we were sat on top of a sand dune watching the sunset or whilst eating our lunches, and we got to find out so much about the culture and the way of life, both just in Jordan in general, but also with the Bedouin community. Tip number 8, try and get involved. On our second day, I think our guide had started to realise what kind of travellers we were, and that we are super flexible and very laid back, and he said to us, "I tell you what, you guys can make the tea." And he then set us off on this challenge. He's like, find 3 rocks, now find some pine needles to get the fire going, and then find some wood to keep the fire alight. What was really interesting is we thought that we were doing the right things, and one of the rocks wasn't quite big enough and we hadn't placed them close enough to one another, and he was able to help guide us on how to actually create this fire to be able to make a cup of tea. And then again he came back over and he said, oh, you know, this wood's not so good, it's not as dry, it's not going to light up as well. And he was able to guide us on what was the perfect wood and the perfect needles to be collecting. And therefore we're now going to be leaving Wadi Rum with this new knowledge of how in a desert like this we could make a fire to be able to make a cup of tea. And I think that if you're not eager to get involved in these sorts of things, you then leave not with that new knowledge. Tip number 9, if you're staying in a desert camp like ours that doesn't have ensuite bathrooms to the tents, you might want to bring a pair of rubber flip-flops just to use in the communal bathrooms. And finally, tip number 10 is just remember that you're in a desert. So just be mindful of things like conserving electricity, making sure that you're turning off the lights when you're not in the tents, and also when choosing your accommodations, even though I did say earlier to maybe prioritise the tour over the accommodations, just ask yourself, do you really need everything that that camp is offering? For me, I did see 1 or 2 that had swimming pools, and it just didn't sit very well with me that that much water was being put into a desert environment like this. And so I chose to go with something that was a lot more simple and what we would actually expect to find in the desert. I hope that some of these tips have been really helpful, and if you are choosing to come to Wadi Rum yourselves, I hope you have an excellent time. And if you do have any further questions about my experience out here, please do just ask in the comments below and I'll try and get back to all of you guys.